Is it recording? Sheldon Solomon, hi. I think we're on and it's recording.
Well, hello, Piero.
Good. So look, for people who don't know you, you're a social psychologist at Skidmore College, and you've been teaching and studying sociology, especially fear, for many decades. And you have written a fantastic book with your colleagues Jeff Greenberg and Tom Szyszynski, The Worm at the Core on the Role of Death in Life. And I'm a big fan of your work and of that book. And I wanted to discuss with you today, we've just went through 2 months or 3 months of a collective worldwide fear psychosis with this virus. And I wanted to have your point of view based on your studies and your teachings on this event, which is an incredible event, probably the first one in humanity.
Yes. So, as you've already mentioned, our work, we study fear. And more specifically, we study the implications psychologically and behaviorally of human beings arguably being the only form of life that's explicitly aware of the fact that we will someday die, even in situations when our life is not in danger. So we take our cue from a cultural anthropologist named Ernest Becker, who in a book called The Denial of Death, Becker argued that we're so smart that we actually realize that we're here. And while that's incredibly uplifting sometimes, it's also terrifying because unless you're a child or cognitively impaired, you realize that, like all living things, your life is of finite duration, and that you too will someday die, which is for a lot of folks an unwelcome realization, compounded by recognizing that not only will you die, but you can die at any time for reasons that you can't anticipate or control. And what Becker argued is that if that's the only thing that we thought about, I'm going to die someday, I can walk outside and get hit by a meteor or smote by a virus, we would be overwhelmed by debilitating existential terror, which he proposed that we manage quite unconsciously by embracing culturally constructed belief systems. He called them cultural worldviews, beliefs that we share with people in our group that reduces death anxiety by giving us each a sense that life has meaning and that we have value. And what he argues very simply is that whether we're aware of it or not, most of our lives is spent trying to maintain confidence in our cultural worldview and faith in our self-worth or self-esteem. And that moreover, when existential anxieties are aroused, we tend to defend our beliefs and we strive to boost our self-esteem. And we've done a ton of studies over the years, for example, showing that when you remind people that they're going to die, that we like other people who look like us and share our beliefs a whole lot more, and we hate and will harm people who are different. And moreover, when we're reminded that we're going to die, it changes our political preferences. We become much more likely to embrace what Max Weber called charismatic leaders, seemingly larger than life individuals who often claim that God has chosen them to rid the world of evil. So there's no shortage of populist, charismatic types these days. We've shown that when you remind people that they're going to die, that they become uncomfortable with the fact that humans are animals, and we become uncomfortable with basic bodily activities, even things that are normally pleasant, like sexual behavior. We become uncomfortable in nature. We become more willing to greedily exploit non-renewable natural resources. That when death is on our minds, we become more conspicuous consumers. We want more money. We want more stuff. We want to be more famous. We drink more alcohol. We eat more cookies. We smoke more cigarettes. We watch more television. And when we remind people that they're going to die, it magnifies all existing psychological conditions. And so people who are afraid of stuff become more afraid. Obsessive compulsive people use more soap and water if you give them an opportunity to wash their hands. Socially anxious people, they go hide in the closet longer if you give them an opportunity to do so. So after September 11th, 2001, we were asked to write a book, just giving our sense of what would happen. And we just said, and this was just struck us as common sense masquerading as psychological insight, we just said, well, seems to us that the events of 9/11, particularly in the US, well, that was like a giant mortality salience induction. It's just like our studies, except instead of being reminded in the lab that you're going to die, every day was a reminder that your life might be at risk. Well, fast forward 20 years, the current pandemic, I would submit, is an even more pervasive and poignantly profound reminder, both literally and symbolically, of the prospect of all of our impending deaths. And so what we predict, just extrapolating from our studies, is that people will do the same thing in reality that they have tended to do in the lab. And so we would expect to see, for example, increases in all kinds of isms. We predict there'll be increases in anti-Semitism, increases in racism, increases in xenophobia and hate crimes. And we have already seen that appears to be the case. Similarly, we think, and this is kind of counterintuitive, that the existential anxieties engendered by the virus will make lots of people cling more tenaciously to populist leaders. So, for example, we did studies prior to the 2016 election showing that American participants preferred Hillary Clinton to now President Donald Trump in a control condition. But when they were reminded of their mortality first,
yes.
Then they really liked the guy who said, only I can keep you safe. And so here on the one hand is the president, and this is not meant to be a political diatribe, but he has arguably bungled every possible reaction to the virus. He has done whatever would make it worse, to the point where we are the thing we are best at in the world right now is death. And yet that has not undermined support for him yet. And he lies more frequently than babies urinate. And people are like, oh, why don't his supporters care? Well, they don't care because that's not what matters. What matters when the psychological shit hits the fan, if you'll pardon the expression, is we need someone or something to give us a sense of security and to help us maintain a sense of meaning and value. And this may sound a little political, but right now, President Trump, who's in the process of trying to be reelected, he understands that when it comes right down to it, that his supporters, they need to feel that it's great to be white more than they need to feel that it's great to eat or have health care or even stay alive. So we expect populist leaders to do quite well during the epidemic. We expect that there will continue to be hostility to the idea that humans are embodied creatures, and that might in turn cause resistance to medical interventions. We expect it to be a hard sell to get people to pay attention to the upcoming environmental apocalypse. And we expect all forms of psychological disorders, that the rates of them will increase substantially. So that would be our general argument, that we expect to see just an across-the-board increase of defensive reactions on the grounds that symbolically and literally death is in the air everywhere.
Now, fellow author, I think Naomi Klein's Shock Doctrine, I think was the title of her book.
Absolutely.
Told us almost 20 years ago of how big events that create massive fears are usually opportunities for whoever wants or is in power to consolidate the power and to control even more in depth lives of people and change the narrative to push the population towards an objective of whoever is in charge, whether it's a politician, deep state, a party, whatever. And I was curious of the psychological workings inside the people, because a virus is even worse than the fear of an enemy, because the virus cannot be seen, cannot be smelled, cannot be, and everyone starts to fear even human contact with each other.
Yes.
How do you see this specific unseen enemy, which can be hidden into anyone?
Yes.
Changing of today.
Yeah, very fine point. I think you've captured something incredibly important, and that is that, and not to degenerate into academic jargon or whatever, but it was Freud who pointed out that anxiety is a lot worse than fear because it's everywhere and it's not attached to anything tangible. Similarly, although the virus is a virus, it can't be seen. It's at least metaphorically everywhere, and that's an impossible psychological condition for humans. We need to concretize the abstract, as Otto Rank put it. We cannot put up with vague or not so vague apprehension. We need to be able to take those anxieties, and even if it's inappropriate, we need to ascribe them to a physical target, ideally a human one, that we can see as a tangible enemy that, if destroyed, will make life fine. So, at least here in the US, we're going to extraordinary lengths to want to say, this was part of some plan, like a James Bond movie, that the virus had to come from a lab in China. The idea that some peasant in a market was eating a bat and some bat shit got on his hand and now the entire earth is collapsing, that just makes, that would be too insane to be able to believe. And so I like how you're thinking about things, and I think that's exactly what's happening right now. At least the way I see it in the U.S., there is a frenzied, almost hysterical need to lay blame. And in the U.S., what's interesting is, because we're fundamentally anti-intellectual, I like how Frank Zappa put it in 1980. He said the American public treats intelligent behavior as if it were some sort of hideous physical deformity. What we've got right now are efforts to take the very legitimate anxieties associated with the virus and to just blame them on just about anyone or anything. And this cuts in both directions. For the most part, what you see are President Trump supporters saying, it's China, or it's Democrats, or it's immigrants. That's why we've got to build the wall higher, as if that will keep a virus out. But there's people on the other side of the political spectrum who are going to just as great a length psychologically to say, everything bad that happens in the world, it must be President Trump who is responsible for all of those things. An idea that I'm sympathetic with, by the way, but that is clearly incorrect.
Mm-hmm. No, by the way, and good for both of us that we still like and enjoy Frank Zappa. But
Yes.
yeah, he ruled. And now, interesting that this anti-intellectualism makes it easier. However, now I'm throwing this idea up. Could it also bring people to have more basic common sense sometimes, that overly too intellectual people? I'm just making the devil's advocate here. But I would agree that the conspiracy theory, and sometimes they are true. I mean, there are conspiracies in history. However, the mindset that tries to explain everything to be organized by whoever profits from the event, and with hindsight, is close to a pathology of the mind to try to placate one's anxiety of not being able to control the unknown, and unknown always happens because we don't control the world, especially as the world becomes even more complex. Who would have thought that 90% of your medicine comes from the area that was shut down because of the virus? Who would have thought that you don't get spare parts for your car because the factories are shut down? Who would have thought? So this complexity, which is unmanageable by any mind, any single mind cannot manage that, can make you, even if you're a common sense person, incredibly anxious, because you figure out that you manage nothing in your life, and you're dependent on all sorts of things that are impossible to manage. And I think that for both intellectual people and, let's say, simple common sense people, this is incredibly scary, and this crisis has been illuminating that fear. And I've not been in the US, obviously, in the last 3 months or 4 months. Have you seen this? Have you seen people, both intellectual and normal guys, who have this same kind of anxiety, or do you see differences?
No, I see people being people, responding. I see, and I don't mean, I'm not using this term disparagingly. Yeah, but I see regular people, not necessarily academics or intellectuals, behave in similar ways. I see plumbers and carpenters and professors, on the one hand, behaving quite rationally, reasonably, and heroically. I don't want to imply that everyone is just reacting as if someone put a knitting needle through their forebrain. There's been grassroots efforts in our town to be sure everybody's fed. A lot of the hotels in the town have been housing homeless folks and sick people. A lot of folks, I've been spreading your book around because my students read it in one of my classes, and I think I told you when we spoke last, I have found your advice to be invaluable. We've got what I call the apocalypse fruit grove in our backyard now, and we've tripled the size of our garden. I should have, this is to my discredit to have waited so long, Pietro, but because of your book, we've now transitioned to procuring almost everything locally. And I have gone out of my way to strike up personal relationships with the local gardens and the people that produce meat and dairy. So, and I'm not the only one. So I see a whole lot of people looking at what you and people like Jim Kunstler and even Bill McKibben, 20 years ago or 10 years ago, you read those things and you're like, yeah, these are good ideas. Now I got to go buy something on Amazon. Now it's like, no, wait a minute. these are good ideas. Let's put them into play. And I see a lot of people, both behind the counters in grocery stores and then in the halls of academia, realizing, like you predicted in your fine book, that this is an unsustainable arrangement, that the economic order based on the assumption of a globalized multinational supply chain that falls apart the minute you can't keep increasing growth, that's not an abstraction. We're now witnessing it. And the idea, like Noam Chomsky, right after the pandemic started, he's like, I don't want to make you miserable, but the pandemic is like a mild headache. Get ready for the migraine, and that's the climate change. Now, you know this, but I'm surprised how many people, intellectual or not, are saying, wow, this is the time. So there might be some good that comes from this, and that's that it takes a depression / World War II like kind of disaster or catastrophe to get people to drop back long enough to consider the possibility that we have no choice but to engage in rather dramatic structural changes. Right. Having said that, though, there are people in my neighborhood. They're both academics and they're just construction workers, and they've become even more animated in their support for populist leaders, in their denigration of science, in their insistence that it is their God-given right to sneeze over anybody that they want while carrying a submachine gun into a pizza parlor. And so I see things moving in both directions, and that it crosses both class and educational categories.
No, interesting, and thank you for your comments. But for sure, the realization that and I wonder if you see this in your academic studies, realization that when you act, when you grow your garden, when you, for example, the media terrorize us. Have been terrorizing us since February, telling us every day how many deaths, which in total is not that big, in fact, but still, they terrorized us every day, every newscast, and no one ever tells you, increase your immune system, don't obese, maybe eat healthy and local and by season, stuff that is good for you. They don't talk about that. They all talk about
what? You are so you are so right. And now, truth be told, it is out there, but it's dwarfed 100 or 1,000 to 1. And this is they say, I think there's a saying in journalism: if it bleeds, it leads.
Yes.
But we have to understand how we're in this positive feedback loop where we're ramping up the terror and agitation by consistently emphasizing and thus making more salient or even overestimating the magnitude of the danger, while almost completely ignoring some very common sense prophylactic factors. I can't get over it. And the two things that I'm like beside myself. Yeah, that physical fitness toughens up the integrity of the immune system. Vitamin D looks incredibly promising. Cardiovascular fitness is of tremendous value. I see some of this as in the U.S. at least, Piero, we have not made the transition from medicine as a defensive reaction to pathology to a proactive effort to maximize physical and psychological well-being. So we're too preoccupied with fixing folks after they've gotten sick rather than coming out and saying, yeah, but here are the things that you might do if you happen to enjoy living. It is fascinating and almost ironic that we in America are just fervently devoted to your right to be obese, to your right to smoke cigarettes, and to your right to be chronically unfit, and therefore to exponentially increase the risk. And I say that fully cognizant of some of the ethnic and economic disparities that make it fundamentally more likely that different groups of individuals will have a harder time adhering to lifestyle behaviors that would make them better to begin with. I'm not naive. You can't eat well if they only have gum at your grocery store, and you can't be fit if you're like sucking in toxic air every time you go out and so on. But we can do a lot better.
I agree. Well, Sheldon, please stay online after we stop the recording. But where can people learn more about you and your work besides your excellent book?
Yeah, that's about it, Piero. Because we're planning on joining the 21st century in the near future. I don't have a website or Twitter account, but you can find me on email. I'm in the psychology department at Skidmore College. I've got a little cameo. Evidently, I've got a minute in the Jeff Gibbs and Michael Moore film, The Planet of the Humans. I don't know if you've seen that yet.
It's on my list.
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting film.
I will look at it.
Yeah, but anybody who wants to find me can, or if they find you, you'll know how to find me.
They're good. They're very good videos of some of your lectures online.
Very good. I can't stand to look at myself, so I've never seen them, but thank you.
They're very good. They're very good. Sheldon, thank you very much for your time, and we'll speak again soon.
My pleasure, Piero.